What if I told you the Nazca people didn't just draw giant lines in the desert? They also used human heads as ritual objects. In ancient Peru, over 2,000 years ago, the Nazca culture created something archaeologists still debate today: trophy heads. They were real human heads, carefully modified, carried, and sometimes displayed for long periods. For a long time, the stories seemed simple. Warriors fought, killed enemies, and took heads as trophies. But the evidence doesn't fully support that explanation. These heads weren't simply discarded remains. They appear to have been intentionally prepared and later used in wider cultural practices we can see in Nazca art and material culture. So the question isn't just what they were, but how their meaning changed over time. Nazca's society wasn't an empire fighting large conquest wars. Instead, it existed in a harsh desert where survival depended on control of water systems, access to irrigated farmland, local alliances and rivalries, and periodic episodes of violence between neighboring groups. This suggests conflict was likely local, intermittent, and tied to resource pressure rather than expansion. And in that context, the human head appears again and again as a result of violence. Once taken, the heads were not treated like ordinary remains. They were defleshed and cleaned, though methods likely varied by region and time. Sometimes the heads are preserved with the jaw tied shut. Others are drilled so cords could be inserted and prepared for transport and display. This points to deliberate modification after death. At this stage, the head is no longer just a war trophy. It becomes a transformed object. The trophy head moves through different stages, from body to object, from object to ritual item, and eventually into symbolic reference. At each stage, it becomes less about the individual person and more about what the head represents within the culture. Meaning is no longer fixed at the moment of death, instead becoming part of a wider system of cultural significance. Here, the evidence becomes more complex. Isotopic analysis suggests that some individuals were local to the Nazca region rather than distant outsiders. This challenges the idea that all heads came from external enemies. It suggests that heads may have come from multiple contexts, including local conflict, episodes of intermittent violence, and in some cases, ritual or socially embedded practices. Nazca ceramics frequently depict trophy heads. They appear in ritual scenes often associated with supernatural figures and within structured ceremonial contexts. This suggests that heads were not only physical objects, but also recurring visual motifs embedded in the culture. At this point, we are seeing the system reflected both in imagery and in practice. There isn't clear evidence that warfare was driven primarily by the goal of collecting heads. However, once the practice existed, it likely began to shape social dynamics. Capturing a head conferred prestige. That prestige reinforced status. Status reinforced authority. And authority in turn may have influenced later cycles of violence. This suggests a feedback loop between violence and social structure. In a harsh desert environment where survival depended on uncertain water supplies and fragile agricultural systems, violence and ritual may have become increasingly intertwined. While conflict may have provided some of the heads, the practice appears to have taken on meanings that extended beyond warfare alone, becoming connected to ideas of fertility, power, and the maintenance of social order. Taken altogether, the evidence doesn't point to a single explanation. Instead, Nazca trophy heads appear within an interconnected system where multiple processes operated at the same time. Violence produced human remains. Ritual practices transformed those remains into meaningful objects, and cultural representation extended their significance beyond their original context. Over time, these processes likely reinforced one another, forming a cultural framework in which human heads carried layered meanings across different areas of life. In this sense, Nazca trophy heads are not best understood as either war trophies or religious objects. They're better understood as points where violence, ritual practice, and cultural meaning intersected and evolved together.